Look down at your own hand, those 5 fingers, that opposable thumb, the grip precise enough to thread a needle or hurl a spear. They are the final page of a story that took millions of years to write. This is the story of how a small, frightened ape, clinging to the edge of survival on the grasslands of Africa, became the creature that would one day paint the walls of caves, sail across oceans, and stand on the surface of the moon. It begins in Africa, deep in a past almost too vast to imagine. Roll the clock back some 7 million years, long before cities, before farms, before fire. There is no such thing as a human being. There are only apes in the forests, and among them a certain branch that will, across countless generations, become us. We did not descend from chimpanzees or gorillas. Instead, we share ancient grandparents with them, a common ancestor from whom 2 roads diverged. One road led to the apes still swinging through the trees today. The other road led here, to you. For a long time, the forests were shrinking, the climate was changing, and the thick canopy that had sheltered our ancestors was breaking apart into open woodland and grassland. Food grew scarce and scattered, and in that pressure, something extraordinary happened. Some of these apes began to walk, not on their knuckles, not in a hunched shuffle, but upright, balanced on 2 legs, their eyes lifted above the tall grass. We know they walked, and we know it in a way that feels almost like magic. In the region of Laetoli, in what is now Tanzania, a volcano dusted the land with soft ash. Rain fell, and the ash turned to something like wet cement. Across it, more than 3.5 million years ago, 3 of our ancestors strolled side by side, and their footprints hardened into stone. You can still see them, the heel striking first, the arch, the toes pushing off, exactly the way your own foot moves when you walk to the door. Across an unimaginable gulf of time, these were people-shaped beings, and they walked as we walk. We even have a face to put to that early chapter. In 1975, in the Afar region of Ethiopia, scientists uncovered the fossilized bones of a young female who lived around 3.2 million years ago. They named her Lucy. She belonged to a species called Australopithecus, and she stood barely more than a meter tall, with a brain not much larger than a chimpanzee's. But her hips, her knees, her spine, they were built for walking upright. Lucy was not yet human. She still climbed trees to sleep and to escape the leopards and the great cats that hunted in the dark. But she walked out into the open on 2 legs, and in doing so, she freed her hands. That is the quiet revolution at the root of everything. Hands no longer needed for walking are hands free to carry, to gather, to hold a baby close, and eventually to make. For hundreds of thousands of years, that was nearly the whole story. Small, upright apes wandering the African plains, eating roots and fruit and seeds, always watching the tree line, always prey as much as anything else. And then, roughly 2.5 million years ago, one of these creatures picked up a stone and, with another stone, struck it at just the right angle. A flake broke away, leaving a razor edge sharper than any claw or tooth in nature. Think about what that means. For the first time, a living thing was not simply using the world as it found it. It was reshaping the world to fit an idea in its mind. We call the toolmaker Homo habilis, the handyman, and the sharp flakes he made could butcher a carcass, crack a bone, cut through a hide that no set of teeth could tear. Suddenly, these small hominins could get at the rich, fatty marrow inside bones, the food that other predators left behind. They could compete. That first cutting edge was the beginning of technology, the first ancestor of every knife, every machine, every tool you have ever touched. And here is the thing about eating meat and marrow. It is dense with energy, and energy is exactly what a growing brain demands. A brain is greedy. Even now, your own brain is only about 2% of your body weight, yet it burns roughly a fifth of all the energy you take in. To grow a bigger brain, our ancestors needed better food, and better tools gave them better food, and better food fed bigger brains that could make better tools. Round and round the cycle turned, over hundreds of thousands of years, each step feeding the next. Then came the traveler. Around 2 million years ago, a new kind of ancestor strode onto the scene. Homo erectus, upright man, taller than anything before, long-legged, with a body built for walking and running across great distances under the African sun. Homo erectus was the first of our line to truly look like us from the neck down. And Homo erectus did something no ancestor had ever done. He left Africa. His bones and tools turn up far across Asia, in the country of Georgia, in China, on the islands of Indonesia. For the first time, a member of the human family walked out into the wider world and kept walking, generation after generation, across deserts and mountains and river valleys, into lands no ancestor had ever seen. But the greatest gift Homo erectus gave us, or one of his close kin, was fire. Imagine that first night. Lightning splits a tree, or embers smolder after a brush fire sweeps the plain. And instead of fleeing the flames like every other animal, one of our ancestors walks toward them. He learns to carry the fire, to feed it, and at last to make it. And everything changes. Fire pushes back the darkness and holds the predators at bay, so that for the first time, our ancestors can sleep on the ground in something like safety. Fire warms the body through the cold, opening up colder lands to settlement. And most importantly, fire cooks. Cooked food is softer, safer, and easier to digest. Cooking is like doing part of your digestion outside your body before the food ever reaches your mouth. It unlocks far more energy from the same meal, energy that could fuel that hungry, swelling brain. Some scientists believe that without cooking, our brains could never have grown as large as they did. And gather around that fire, in the flickering circle of light, with the whole cold and dangerous night held back beyond it, that is where our ancestors began to sit together, face to face, hour after hour. That is where, in all likelihood, they began to talk. We cannot dig up a spoken word. Language does not fossilize, but we can trace its shadow. We can see the brain regions swelling in the fossil skulls. We can see the tools growing more refined and more standardized, shaped to a shared idea, passed carefully from one mind to the next. And we can see the results of imagination itself, because somewhere along this journey, our ancestors crossed a threshold no creature had ever crossed before. They began to imagine things that were not there. By around 300,000 or 400,000 years ago, the human family had branched into several different kinds of humans living at once. In the cold of Ice Age Europe and Western Asia, lived the Neanderthals. And forget the old cartoon of the dim-witted brute. Neanderthals were powerful, brilliantly adapted to a brutal world, with brains as large as ours or larger. They made sophisticated tools, hunted mammoth and bison in coordinated groups, wore clothing, controlled fire with ease, and cared for their sick and their elderly. They buried their dead in deep caves in Spain. More than 60,000 years ago, someone painted the walls with red ochre, a Neanderthal hand, reaching across the dark toward meaning. They were not us, but they were truly, deeply human. And in Africa, around 300,000 years ago, In a place called Jebel Irhoud, in what is now Morocco, we find the earliest bones of our own species at last. Homo sapiens, wise man, you. Anatomically, these were people you could pass on the street, but the real transformation was happening on the inside. Over the following 100-odd thousand years, something ignited in the sapiens' mind, a spark of pure imagination. Look at what they left behind. In caves like Lascaux in France and Altamira in Spain, they painted herds of horses and bulls and stags galloping across the stone, breathing and alive by torchlight, tens of thousands of years old and still able to take your breath away. They carved tiny statues from mammoth ivory. They pierced shells and animal teeth to string as beads and wore them as ornaments. They carved a figure with the body of a man and the head of a lion, a being that exists nowhere in nature, only in the mind. And that is the true miracle. Not just tools, not just fire, but the ability to imagine what is not there, to picture the mammoth before the hunt, to picture next winter and store food against it, to picture a spirit, a story, a god, to picture a stranger and call him kin. This is the invisible superpower that let humans cooperate in their thousands, bound together not by blood, but by shared ideas, by shared stories. And with that power, we spread. Beginning perhaps 60 to 70,000 years ago, wave after wave of Homo sapiens walked out of Africa and did not stop. Trace the Great Migration across the map of the world, up through the Middle East, east along the warm coasts of Asia, and then, astonishingly, across open water, because somewhere around 50,000 years ago, humans built boats or rafts and crossed the sea to Australia, a continent no ancestor had ever touched. They pushed north into the frozen mammoth steppe of Ice Age Siberia, and when the sea level dropped and exposed a bridge of land where the Bering Strait now lies, they crossed from Asia into the Americas and flowed all the way down to the southern tip of South America. Within a few tens of thousands of years, a heartbeat in the long story of life, a single African species had walked to nearly every corner of the planet. Along the way, we met the others. When Homo sapiens moved into Europe and Asia, the Neanderthals were already there, and the two peoples met. They did not only compete, they loved. They had children together, and we know this because their DNA is still inside us. If your ancestry lies outside of Africa, you very likely carry a small but real fraction of Neanderthal DNA in your body right now, in the cells of the hand you are looking at. The other humans did not entirely vanish. In a quiet way, they live on in us. But the world that once held many kinds of human narrowed until only one was left. Only Homo sapiens remained. Only us. Step back and take in the whole sweep of it. A shrinking forest that forced an ape onto two legs, a freed pair of hands, a sharpened stone, a stolen ember of fire, a brain swelling generation by generation, fed by cooked meat, and sharpened by the endless problems of survival, the dawn of speech around a fire, and the birth of imagination that let us build worlds inside our skulls. And then the long walk outward, across every desert and ocean and frozen plain, until the children of Africa had inherited the earth. Everything you have ever known was carried here on that journey. Every language spoken, every song sung, every city raised, every question asked about the stars, all of it rests on the shoulders of Lucy, walking upright in the ash, of the handy ones chipping their first blades, of the wanderers carrying fire into the dark. You are not separate from that story. You are its living edge, the latest page still being written. So the next time you look up at the night sky and feel the pull of something vast and unknown, remember that same restless spark once lifted a small ape's eyes above the grass and sent us walking toward the horizon. We have been travelers, makers, and dreamers from the very beginning, and the incredible story of our evolution is not finished. It is still being written right now by you.